Assalamu alaikum and welcome to About Islam, an online platform presenting mainstream authentic Muslims to the world. I'm your host, Layla Abdullah Poulos, educator, cultural critic, and managing editor of NBA Muslims. We have a new president elect and a new VP elect. There's still votes being counted, but it's pretty clear who that Joe Biden will be our next president. Okay, and we'll have a VP, Kamala Harris, who will be the first woman of color, Black woman VP in American history, which is very, very exciting. And so I wanted to talk about her, about the presidency, and all kinds of things like that. And the person to join me today is Margari Aziza, co-founder and executive director of the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
How are you doing,
salam.
Margari?
We're hanging in there. We're
Hanging in
we
there?
yeah. I mean, we just had a follow-up, right, of following the elections with organizers, faith-based organizers, working and who are trying to, we're working to center those most impacted by policies. And it's like, okay, we have to collect our breath, but we also need to think going forward, so the work has just begun.
Now, see, that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about because one of the things that I keep saying is that, honestly, in a lot of ways, I am trying to stay grounded in this whole idea of a change in administration. So changing from Trump to Biden, okay, and that there are these harsh realities that exist for me as a Black person in America, as a Muslim in America. And so I know that faith-based organizations play, like Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, play a huge role in the issues that are impacting us in our layered identities. So is this like, does this change in administration make it mean more work for you?
I don't know if it's more work. I mean, Muslim Arc was founded during the Obama administration, right? The movement for Black lives, and in fact, most of the freedom struggle, right? Like, I mean, it was during kind of more progressive democratic administration. So it doesn't stop like whoever's in office, right? Like, because you have things lower down on the ticket, right? You have like Senate, within the Senate, within the House of Representatives, within the state, even within local governments, right? So on all of those levels, but what we have been seeing is and as someone that identifies as progressive, the reason why I do is because like I look at root causes, right? Not just the kind of surface level or just the party politics, but when you're looking at a root cause analysis for systemic racism, you have to have a radical solution, right? And when you're coming at a radical solutions, like getting at the root cause, like at the core of racial inequality, you have to really push more for the progressive agenda leads more to that rather than the kind of surface quota based or some of the compromises that people are already calling for, right? Of ending, there's calls of ending Affordable Care Act, when healthcare during a pandemic, right? Like it's just like you have people dying, like 200,000 people diagnosed with COVID, and there's a challenge in the Supreme Court to deny that. There's a time I didn't have medical coverage because I have pre-existing conditions and I could not buy my own medical coverage.
Mm.
And so when that goes away, where's that going to leave me as an individual, right? From, and it's and I there's a plethora of other issues that we're pushing for. But what I saw, right, even the week before were the establishment, some establishment Democrats, even Black establishment Democrats, throwing some of the squad, because they were seen as too progressive, under the bus,
Of course.
specifically like Ilhan Omar,
Mm,
right? Ayanna Presley, AOC, like, throwing them under the bus. So
yeah.
we know like the work, right? Like that when there was like these broad coalitions, right? The anti-Trump coalitions, when many of them were okay, they were complacent in policies that allowed for Black death. And it's like, well, now they're going to be still, they may be opposition, passive opposition, active opposition to the racial justice work that we must continue. So for us, it is absolutely important for us to hold our officials accountable, like for those of us for pressing forward for racial justice, we have to hold them accountable. We have to keep working towards like educating people about the issues. We can't just let them silence us as we're trying to press for criminal justice reform. People want to toss out, the defund the police, right? They want to toss that, throw Black Lives Matter under the bus, right? Like in all the people that were getting out the vote, many of those were progressive organizers. And so for us, it's like we have to think about our strategy. We have to think about still half the country openly supported, right? They voted for administration that was xenophobic, anti-black, pro law enforcement, pro business, right? I mean, just like like look at how many people made so much money under, during COVID.
Including the president himself and how
Yeah,
much it's worth.
they made an incredible amount. And so we have their base is very activated. And then we also have to kind of keep
Mhm.
pushing along our own, like people that are allies with us, but they may just become complacent and start to that same rhetoric of silencing the movement for Black lives, the movement for like that centers working class people, poor urban, poor rural people,
Mhm.
and just still support moneyed interests. So that's what my concerns are, is like that complacency. And then you still have a very activated and politicized and empowered white nationalist groups, that still exist. So in some ways, like,
Like just around me.
yeah, I
We
mean,
have the
it's
KKK very much so on this island.
yeah, I'm in San Bernardino County, so they're out here too, and so we have to think about how do we defend our people. I just joined the Southern Movement Assembly because I mean their work is so important, has informed my organizing, especially in the past few years
Mhm.
of like organizers from Project South, and their platform is so powerful, right? Of thinking about and they're coming from that tradition of SNCC, this non-student nonviolent
Yes.
coordinating committee. And so for me, drawing on that tradition, right, of and learning from them, and like I believe like they have more of the answers of healing this country than when you have like some of the what they call quote unquote coastal elites who still would, many of them, once they go back to, okay, now we got our person in office, they're going to silence, many of us.
Okay, so that's the thing. I think a lot of times people don't appreciate the levels.
Mhm.
It's like I mentioned in a previous interview with Tariq I mean that we never fully appreciate the diversity of Trump supporters.
Mhm.
It's not just like that mega hat wearing supporter. There are elite among them there are people of different backgrounds, different races. So it's very much the case when it comes to the Democratic Party and the Biden Harris ticket. There are levels. So
Mhm.
you're saying that we have this very much move these movements to improve the egalitarian nature that the society is supposed to be, to improve the lives of people who are directly impacted by economic and policy. And so a lot of time we may be anesthetized to the fact that, well, we got Biden in office, so everything is going to be okay. But is everything going to be okay? Is this administration focusing on those things that are still impacting people, focusing on reuniting families?
Mhm.
Okay, focusing on healthcare, like you said, focusing on the fact that there's still a pandemic that's going on that's disproportionately killing Black people. We have the
Yeah.
Black Muslim COVID coalition because Black Muslims know our people are being devastated by this disease, and by virtue of the fact of we're the ones that are, a lot of us are first responders when it comes to the disease. So is there still like is there hope, or is there a potential that this administration is going to focus on those things, Or are we just making assumptions because it's a blue administration, because the one of the vice president is a person of color? Are we just making assumptions that these things are going to improve, or do we still have to kind of like call them to task, and we have these long rows to hoe?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the organizing principles is like power never concedes anything without power. So without people power and without accountability, it won't. People don't do things like, especially when you're talking about government, and especially given, that there are deep interests that still want to keep Guantanamo open, still want to keep the Muslim ban. So like we do have to hold this administration accountable to in the ban. We can't be a concession, right? We have to reunite families, right? You still have children that are not reunited with their parents, right? Like when you're thinking black immigrants at the borders, right? So my concerns is that some of the calls for healing, which I get, racial justice work. I believe in healing and reconciliation, but at the same time, like if you're not sitting there like doing some of that healing, and for those who have done harm and perpetuated harm aren't willing to concede, like, yeah, that's a harmful policy, then I don't, I mean,
Mm,
then that healing, you may just be tossing some of the most vulnerable people under the bus by blaming them, right? Or by just saying, like, you know what, they're not voting people, right? Like some of the, for those who are banned by the Muslim ban, right? It's so we're gonna give that so that we can move forward with this policy. So those are my concerns, right? Like, and that in order to keep pushing forward, that we still have to build power. I mean, the multiracial coalitions, right? We have to support, we have to defend our people. We have to be able to say, like, look, these are things that we're not going to compromise on, and we're going to keep, drive up, not, like even like a hard bargain. We're going to push, we're going to like do education campaigns, we're going to do political action campaigns, and be deeply engaged. We learned from, during the Obama administration, like once people got him in office, they were chill, like they were just and then we saw the Tea Party.
mm,
This is we're actually, much of what we're seeing right now, like the rollback of civil liberties, the deregulation, right? Even like the environmental policies, the stacking of the Supreme Court are a product of 50 years of strategy and
yeah.
coordinated action from the neocons, right? And even some of the work, like, where Sarah Palin, right, like activating what would become like what is like the MAGA crowd, like the Trump supporters, the birthers, and everything. So if we don't have that long durée vision and can't and don't think about like what is the world that we want to see, I mean, I've seen the changes in my home, like my hometown, right? The rates of the unhoused, right? The gentrification, social issues that still are just like they just deepen the fracturing of our society, and it's
Mhm.
unacceptable. So for me, it's like I am still committed to building that power. We're still having organizers to look at, okay, now that we've elected certain officials, what are issues of key concern, right? With that we have growing wealth disparities, especially with COVID. Look at the percentages of Black businesses that have shut down, disproportionate. We have voter disenfranchisement. Most of the voters, like that's a key issue. So we have
Yeah.
to work on gerrymandering, like a whole plethora of issues that will continue. And just because we have representation, this is like our second Catholic president, like ever. And
Yeah, but
like,
Kennedy, he hemmed in hard when it
yeah.
came to the civil rights bill.
Oh yeah, yeah,
He
so it's
was,
just like, so I mean, we have that, we have like, now we have like sort of religious representation, we have but really like the shift, what did you see with this administration of acknowledging racial justice has been because of the organizing of Black Lives Matters for years. Like these, like the protests, the ways we understand these issues have come from consistent organizing, and it began before Black Lives Matters. I mean, they were learning organizing from organizers. So it's like this
Yeah.
continual work of addressing criminal justice, of creating progressive platforms that center working class people, that center Black people, um, people of color, immigrants, the most marginalized in our society. Like that has been coordinated action, people power building. And I think that, we can't just say like, okay, we needed that bad guy, right? That one
Mm,
object, that one target, when our, it was under the Johnson administration, right? And the Kennedy, like that, we had the civil rights movement,
yeah.
right? And
Yep.
and so like just thinking about what will it take? It'll take us being consistently involved, and it means like we can't just placate, right? And that we have to now, like what has been normalized through media, some media outlets, and what has been acceptable, we can't let that be normalized. So that's where we're at, and what I'm seeing from faith-based organizers, from clergy. These are congregations, right? That are leading the charge. You also have Southern organizers,
Mhm.
those who turning these states, they're turning them blue, which is
Yeah.
for me, like, I mean, my ancestral homeland is
Mhm.
Georgia. Like
Oh,
my
really? You're
grandfather was
Georgian.
driven out of Georgia
Yeah.
due to conflict. And so, like, I mean,
Yeah.
I left a message. I was like with someone, I said, you know, what's happening right now is my ancestors' dream. Because I mean, I talked
Yeah.
with my great uncle, and he was just like, the one of the worst things that actually happened to our family was when they did the more northern migration. Like they left their land, they were
Mm,
disenfranchised due to violence, right? The threat of
yeah.
violence, the story
Yep.
that my grandmother talked about. One of the last cogent stories she told me before she went into dementia was about hiding on the street. She was on the road and she hid from white men, from mobs, because they would
Yeah.
murder Black men and rape Black women. So that was like, so when I'm thinking about the power of that, and to see Black people being empowered to change that state,
Yeah.
that's their prayers. That's my
I
ancestors' prayers.
I think that, yeah, it's still tough to vote when you're black,
Yeah.
and I mean, there's a history of that. I mean, when you look at Fannie Lou Hamer, who was beaten and
Mhm.
thrown off off the land that she was sharecropping simply because she voted. I mean, there were whole tent cities of black families that were thrown off by white landowners off of their sharecropping farms because they voted. Okay, and even present day, like you said, the gerrymandering, the shenanigans at the polls, like honestly, the just like the desire to suppress the black vote, is something that continues. It's a hard thing when you want to select uh the politicians that are going to impact your life simply because of the color of your skin. So yeah, that was very, very important, and it was monumental. And the fact that, like, one reverend said, we gone from picking cotton to picking presidents because Joe Biden won because of the black vote.
Yeah, in Detroit. Yeah.
Detroit, Georgia flipped, Pennsylvania
Philly.
flipped when it
Yeah.
came, like Philly.
It was Philly.
Really, I was like, "Welcome back, Pennsylvania. Thank you. We got a plate for you." Let's say. So it becomes very, very important. But I'm wondering also, as Muslims, just like we can't make assumptions because I very much see Biden and Harris as that those political power playing Democrats. Okay, Kennedy was, Johnson was. You can't get into that office. I think Bernie shows that you really can't get into that office unless you're that mainline power playing Democrat. Okay, and so, but also as Muslims, do we have this assumption that when it comes to those things that are actually a mandate from Allah to fight oppression, to
Mhm.
help people in need, and so, as we have these organizations like the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative that are at the grassroots doing those type of things, do we assume that all Muslims feel that way and are supporting our organizations?
No.
or is there stark reality that we
There's some
have to deal?
stark realities.
Because
There's
girl,
some
I
stark
know I've heard
realities.
some stuff where it's just like they push back hard.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, Muslim scholarship that pushes back hard on us seeking equity,
Mhm.
our civil rights, and more justice. So it's just like, but we generally have this delusion that like, yeah, all Muslims are backing up Muslim arc, all Muslims are backing up these uh, uh, promoting these policies where families are brought back together, where there's more quality healthcare for all Americans. So do we have that? Do we, or are our eyes open?
No, I mean, and you would know more than anyone, right? Like like for, I mean, we still Muslim Arc doesn't have all Muslim support. I mean, we have a lot of opposition. You have a lot of people that have a lot of problems with us raising up the voice of Black Muslims and calling us divisive for saying certain issues were key, key issues, right? And yeah, we've had an increased boost of support, and when people saw our methodologies, right, like they, when they experience us, then we get some nods of approval, a lot of like shaking their heads, right? Like it's been a long road. We're trying to be, like we've had to just bootstrap it for many, 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 many years, and then we're expected to like kind of do things, and we stumbled along the way, like because it was like just the lack of resources, the lack of support, the lack of people just really getting behind what we were calling people to do, which is
Mhm.
like, both like that interpersonal, right, and then addressing these systemic issues and taking a look within ourselves, and the kind of systems that we as a faith community uphold. But I do think it's like, I mean, there's so many complex issues, right? Like that we have with this election, right? Like you're saying, like with Kamala Harris, like as a Black woman, as a woman of color, and because of like with Muslims, right? Like, the largest group that we have are Asian Muslims, right? Like as a, which Asia is still a diverse identity, but like you have like Asian Americans are like, yes, we finally got representation. And you got Black folks who are like, yeah, we got a sister. And she came out with Mary J. Blige. Like, who would think that? Like she was a AKA. So I don't know. They're skiing like all over the place. Like I'm just kind of like, I heard they're just like really like, doing all like doing the most, and like she's a historically Black college graduate, so there's all these things around representation, right? And then, I mean, I basically like was in a like I had to deal with some of these tensions during the primaries where people were really upset by like some of the progressive like criminal justice reform folks that were highlighting how Kamala Harris had was part of a system that did lock up lots of Black men,
She's a California
Yeah,
prosecutor, right?
prosecutor. Yeah. So when they're just like, okay, she's a cop, and people are like, and there were some white women that were like, she's not a cop. But I was like, well, actually, she is. And it was like they got a point there, and it's like so, but don't dismiss, like, you have people who had to go weekly, monthly. They're sitting there, like when you talk about like mothers from like places like SC Justice who like how do you support your family members who are being locked up, and so that pain is real, right? And so, you have that danger of like, like of not just of representation, but just dismissing the real critiques um
Hmm.
officials that supported harmful crime bills, right? That just exacerbated mass incarceration. Um, and then now there is that reckoning, right? Because it's like we have a greater political awareness around it. But
Hmm.
what does that do that now, they're open to address systemic racism and say like, oops, my bad, I supported that. Like, I don't know, like,
Well, I mean, it's a kind of a catch-22. I mean,
yeah.
like I said, you can't get into that office without going down certain avenues. Like,
Yeah,
honestly,
you're gonna lose certain, it's hard, right? Like, I
law
mean,
is a very complex, and it's a quagmire. The law is a
Yeah.
quagmire. So where do you want to go as an attorney, and what do you want to do, and how can you affect change? I mean, there are avenues to getting to being a judge. There are avenues of getting to be a politician. You know, you have to weigh your options and decide what you want to do. I think that oftentimes we may, and I'm not trying to get into her head, but I mean, we may often overlook the fact that sometimes people decide that they have to bear it and kiss the frog in order to
I mean,
get.
or they, maybe just people like they believe in that system, right? Like
Yeah,
to
that's true
navigate
too.
it well, like you have to kind of believe in what you're doing, right? And
Mhm.
just being like, you know what? Like there were black people that were all like tough on crime. We got to do
Yes,
it. We got to clean
yes.
this up. We got to
Mhm.
get. There's so much blaming of people and like of the communities that they're saying that are like, oh, these communities perpetuating crime. So what I do think is like when as people are navigating the system, right? Like, and when we don't have an anti-racism framework, right? It's like, or even just like that awareness as far as like, how do you make your world a better place? Are we going to, like people are going to make choices based on what they're taught to believe, and then also the system, like I think that there's some, because there are some ways that the system picks their model minorities, right? Like the ideal people that can navigate the system better.
Yeah.
And I remember being, and this is probably one of the more challenging discussions, and I'll try to wade a little bit into it, but coming
No,
from
I'm
like,
not
I'm
scared.
unaware, I'm so sorry, love, forgive me, because like, I may get people down my throat, but like, and I'll say this as with a little bit of a nuanced identity as someone who's had to like be in a multicultural household where we also have some Afro-Caribbean background, but it's like so from there are model minorities, right? And model black folks that are still allowed to navigate that. And I felt that like when as a non-traditional student coming from a working class background, like with this very challenged, like not linear trajectory for undergrad. Took me 10 years, right? And so when I got into graduate school, and when I was at Stanford University, and I remember there was like most of the students that were there in graduate school, we were about 1 to maybe 3%. I don't know. Like it was like, but most of the black students were African immigrants or the children of African immigrants, many of them like diplomats, like they were like did well, right? Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean, biracial, and maybe like a little sprinkling of like black Southern elites, and I was just
Yeah.
like, so I was kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, I don't know,
Oh, you're
like I
absolutely
mean, I was trying to navigate that, and then, like, so there was, like, one other person that came from, like, my background, and
right.
I was struggling, like, I was struggling,
Mhm.
like, but when I looked at, like, who was succeeding in my department, who had the good Queen's English, and then who they were just
Yeah.
like, "We just don't think Margaret could cut
And
it."
you're a little too native
Too
for
hood. Yeah, you're a
native
little
black
too
African
hood.
American.
You don't have that
Well, I mean,
polish.
honestly,
So,
I
yeah.
honestly, when we look at the two black people who have garnered the highest offices in this country, the presidency and the vice presidency, neither one of them comes from an African American background. Neither one of them
Yeah.
comes from, honestly, neither one of them comes from that whole trajectory, history, and tradition of Black resistance stemming from enslavement here in the United States, and it may be reflective of what the broader society is comfortable with. As far as when it comes to blackness, because we both know that there's layers to that. Like you said, there are these they're model blacks, like you said. And so not saying that it's their fault. It's not Obama's fault. It's not Harris's fault, but it's the way the society is structured, very much so. And the fact that, like a Jesse Jackson, they were very uncomfortable with.
Mhm.
And, they were more comfortable with Obama and with Harris.
'Cause
And
you
so that,
couldn't come from that tradition of Black resistance and achieve those heights because you're resistance rather than
yeah,
being like there's certain narratives that are that are seen as like, wow, that's an inspiring narrative, right? So
Yeah.
this story of like, okay, we came to America with nothing, right? And look at what's possible, as opposed to being like, wow, like the story of like, wow, our family were sharecroppers and driven from their
Yeah.
land and they fought in the Black freedom struggle. So they're gonna have these little comments that they make that
They had
people are gonna
everything
pick up.
destroyed in Cleveland.
Yeah, so those trajectories are difficult. It doesn't mean that, like, I mean, I reject the idea of like you have to think about black in a narrow sense, right? Because then
Yeah,
that would just cut out like all the kind of Afro-Caribbean connections,
absolutely.
including like my great grandfather who,
Exactly.
who's Jamaican and came early 20th century. So um
Well, you can't because wasn't Marcus Garvey Afro-Caribbean?
yeah, yeah. So I mean, Malcolm X, Afro-Caribbean. So there's all those linkages, right? Like of like the kind of understanding the black, the African diaspora and blackness in its broad sense. And it does open up, like I mean, of thinking about like what's possible, like I mean, I showed my daughter, I was like, this is the first woman who's a vice president ever, and there's a black woman. And he's like, oh, she's just
Yeah,
kind
that
of,
says something.
you
That definitely says
her
something.
nieces,
Yeah.
she has like black family members, and there's like, I mean, the thing that is also like, difficult as a Muslim, like, just the imagery, right? It was a cathartic moment to, because it was like this impossibility, a running joke to see a black president, and to see like a lot of people don't want to see a black person in power. Not to say
Yeah.
that that position makes them good or bad, because like many of those power positions are, it's dangerous, it's bad for your soul, like you're going to have a lot of blood on your hands as a head of a, and nation states are very
Oh,
bloody just
absolutely. Yep.
in itself, and so that's not a position that I would want. But like people really don't want to ever see a black person in power, because it's like,
Exactly.
where are we supposed to be, is like basically kind of beasts of labor for their, maybe like to help them out, to boost them up, but
Yeah.
not necessarily to just be like a black person that has proximity to power.
Yeah.
Um, and
Very
so
thing.
so there was a lot of challenges around, like where I saw like kind of cropping up anti-blackness within our own community of addressing Obama, and it's going to be very
Mm,
similar, right?
okay.
And we're going to kind of have to navigate that, and I think that, in the next 4 years, God willing, we could have some nuanced discussions around diaspora identity,
Yeah.
representation, power, have a better understanding of that. And then, like maybe, I mean, I don't, like maybe we could kind of rethink like how we're building our communities of, or even, like, I mean,
Mhm.
I don't want my daughter to like be like her highest aspiration is running for president. That's not what I'm thinking, the power of the moment, but
Mhm.
the fact that like um that my daughter can imagine different ways of being her future in a society, right? Where her
Yeah.
ancestors were dehumanized, her ancestors were enslaved and did not have autonomy. So it's like I do think it's important to allow people to process. I mean, I know I have a lot of conflicting emotions myself, right? As far as what I saw, like in the speeches, and there's like one part of me is like, yeah, and another part I'm like, and there's another part that just feels mixed, and I want to cry, and then I'm just like, I want to take a break, but then I'm like, I got to push forward. I think we should all allow all of that to happen, right? And that we should kind of deepen these discussions and talk about um when can we imagine like the young, I know like that image, the image of like Kamala, but like that little girl in the
Ruby
inner city,
Bridges.
yeah, Ruby
Yeah,
Bridges,
I had my own
a
feelings about
little
that.
little
It definitely
girl
did.
that looks like one of those, like you take a girl from Compton and she can aspire to be
There
what
you
she
go.
wants to be. And
Exactly.
that's something
Yeah.
I think, yeah, we're moving some steps forward, but like right now we need to actually listen to them right now and
Yeah.
do something about that. So that's where I'm at. I'm so happy to have this discussion. This is
Thank you.
like, thank you for letting me, because I had to get some stuff off my chest.
No,
That
it's
was
important.
hard.
No, it's very, very important. There's some stuff
Yeah.
going on at these cross sections of identity, and
Yeah.
one of the things I had to think about at the end of the day, what Kamala Harris represents for like our kids, those
Yeah.
ambiguous people with
I know.
multiple identities.
I
You
know.
know? And it's just like, you can flat iron your hair and it'll look a certain way and no one will
Yeah.
they gotta squint to kind of decide what you are or make assumptions about your identity. So
Yeah.
she definitely does that. And that's an exciting thing. That's not a
Yeah.
bad thing. That's an exciting thing. And I think that if we have productive conversations around that, because where she is
Mhm.
definitely is representational. And so there are going to be conversations about that. So no, I think that it's very, very important. Like you're right, it's a whole cross section of emotions that you have to process based on just your experiences as a black person, as a woman, as a Muslim, and all of that stuff. So it is very exciting. Thank you so much
Thank you
for
for
joining
having
me and
me.
grounding me a little bit.
Well, thank you for grounding me because I was like in my head. We have to have more of these talks. We have to have more of these
We
talks.
definitely have to have more of
Yeah.
these talks. We want to talk about that whole idea of what is going on, where it's just like people are not comfortable with that African American blackness. We gotta have
Yeah,
that
I
conversation.
know, because somebody said they haven't seen somebody in office with a black mama, so I was just like, okay, like African American, so
I'm saying, okay, all right.
so
I was looking forward to Stacey Abrams. It's like, what's
yeah,
that sister up? Okay, George,
okay.
but Joe better do something for her because she gave him Georgia. So
Yeah, yeah. I look forward to that and let's continue the conversation,
yeah,
inshallah.
inshallah. All right, thank you
Okay,
so much
thank
for
you.
joining me.
Okay.
Thank you for joining me. Remember, joining About Islam. Remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment to Margaret. What do you think about the whole Kamala presidency? About the need for us to continue to do work, not to get complacent, and not to just like fall asleep in our delusions that because it's a Democratic president that everything's going to be all right. All right. Don't forget to click that bell so that you can get the notification for the next time I interview a fantastic Muslim. Assalamu alaikum.